It's after midnight, and a young man is walking home by himself. The street is completely empty. It's quiet. Up ahead, under a streetlight, he sees someone. At first, he thinks it's just another person out late. But then, he realizes this person isn't walking. They're moving in this strange, jerky way. Their legs are kicking too high, their arms are swinging too wide, their whole body twisting at weird angles, almost like a puppet being yanked around by strings. The young man slows down, staring, and that's when the figure suddenly freezes. They stop mid-step, and then very slowly, they turn their head and look right at him. And what he sees on this person's face is so disturbing, he will never forget it for the rest of his life. What you've just heard is a dramatized retelling of one of the most infamous encounters ever posted online. Before we continue this story, I want to ask you something. If you believe that dark myths, strange histories, and forgotten legends are worth remembering, if you believe the mysteries of our past should not be lost, you can help us keep the archive alive. Like this video, subscribe to this channel. Your support keeps the candle lit and allows us to keep exploring the shadows. Because this story, the one you're about to hear, isn't just about one man on one street in the middle of the night. It's about a figure people all over the world have claimed to see, sometimes on a sidewalk, sometimes in their bedrooms, sometimes in their dreams, always silent, always moving wrong, and always smiling. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. The account you just heard didn't come from a police report or a news story. It came from the internet. In 2012, a young man shared this experience on a subreddit called Let's Not Meet, a forum where people post encounters with strangers they hope never to run into again. His post was simple. No dramatic writing, no special effects, just a matter-of-fact description of what happened to him on a late-night walk home. And yet, this short post exploded. Thousands of people read it, shared it, and began talking about it. Some dismissed it right away. They said he must have seen a drunk man, or maybe someone pulling a prank. But others recognized something deeply unsettling in his story. It wasn't just that the figure was creepy. It was the details, the strange, exaggerated movements, the silence, the grin that seemed too wide, too fixed. Those details stuck with people, because when you strip them down, they don't sound like the behavior of a person at all. They sound like someone, or something, trying to imitate a person and getting it horribly wrong. Tonight, we're going to go back to that original post. We'll reconstruct exactly what this witness saw, step by step. And then, we'll look at the ripple it created, the other encounters, the folklore connections, and the theories that try to explain the impossible. The post begins with something ordinary, a man heading home after midnight. The streets are silent, lined with dim pools of streetlight. At first, he notices a figure ahead. Nothing unusual. But then he realizes the man isn't just standing there. He's moving in this exaggerated, almost theatrical way. His strides stretch too long, his knees snapping upward, as though he were parodying the act of walking. It wasn't stumbling like a drunk. It was too controlled, too deliberate, like an actor rehearsing in slow motion. Except the motions didn't belong to any dance the witness had ever seen. He slowed, uneasy, and that's when the figure stopped altogether. His body froze in place, not easing to a halt, but locking into stillness. Then, without shifting his shoulders. His head rotated, and there it was. The face. The eyes wide, the mouth stretched into a grin so taut it looked like it was drawn on. The man didn't speak. He didn't laugh. He just stared, that grin plastered across his face. The witness looked away quickly, crossing to the other side of the street. When he glanced back, the man was gone. For a second, relief. Maybe he'd just slipped away into an alley. Maybe it was nothing. But then he saw him again. The man was standing under another streetlight, closer this time, still smiling, still staring. The witness's pulse spiked. He quickened his pace, trying to act casual, but every time he looked over his shoulder, the man was there, always closer, always smiling. And then the man began to move again. He didn't walk normally. He didn't run. His strides were long, jerky, unnatural, like someone trying to pretend they knew how walking worked. And through it all, that smile never moved. By now, the witness's fear had boiled over. He broke into a run. His footsteps echoed off the pavement, his heart hammering in his chest. He sprinted down the block, through the silence of the neighborhood, not daring to look back. When he finally reached his apartment building, he fumbled with his keys, hands shaking, and for some reason, maybe instinct, maybe curiosity, he turned for one last look. The street was empty. The smiling man was gone. The Reddit post ends there. No confrontation, no resolution. Just an ordinary night that became a nightmare, then ended in silence. But what makes this story so disturbing is not just what happened, it's what didn't. The smiling man didn't attack. He didn't speak. He didn't ask for anything. He was simply there, conjured from nothing, performing his strange dance, following and then vanishing. And that's why this story stuck. Because when we picture danger, we expect logic, robbery, assault, revenge, something we can explain. But the smiling man had no motive, no reason, just presence. And that detail, that lack of reason, is exactly what scared people most. When the story spread online, readers were fascinated. Some brushed it off as a drunk man, but others pointed out the same thing. The movements weren't drunk. They were too sharp, too controlled, too deliberate. And then the replies started rolling in. People from different places, different years, claiming they had seen someone like him too. A tall, thin man, silent, smiling, moving wrong. The smiling man was no longer just one story. It was becoming something else, a pattern. After this story spread, people didn't just talk about the smiling man like he was some creepy stranger. They started comparing him to something bigger. Because the truth is, the idea of a smiling figure in the dark is not new. Folklore around the world is full of beings that grin too wide or laugh when no one else is laughing. In Japan, there's the Hyotoko, a trickster spirit with a twisted, frozen smile. In European legends, there are devils and demons that disguise themselves as friendly travelers, always grinning until they reveal what they really are. Even Native American stories describe figures who mimic human behavior, but always get something just slightly wrong. And the smiling man fits right in. Think about it. This isn't a ghost in a haunted house or a monster hiding in the woods. He shows up in the middle of ordinary life, on a sidewalk, under a streetlight, in a place you thought was safe. And what makes him terrifying isn't fangs or claws. It's something we normally think of as friendly, a smile. But there's a reason our brains flip that smile into fear. Psychologists call it the uncanny valley, the place where something looks almost human, but not quite. It's the reason mannequins creep us out. It's why realistic dolls make us uneasy. And it's why a smile that doesn't move or stretches too far suddenly feels like a threat. Our brains are wired to recognize people instantly. It's how we survived, by reading faces, expressions, and intent. So when we see a face that looks human but doesn't behave the way it should, alarms go off. We know something's wrong, even if we can't explain why. And that's exactly what the smiling man taps into. He isn't just following you. He isn't just staring. He's breaking all the little rules of how people are supposed to act. He moves wrong. He holds eye contact too long. He smiles when nothing is funny. And all of that creates the same reaction, fear. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When people started replying to the original Reddit story, some of them claimed they had seen the exact same thing, years before the post was ever written. They described men who smiled too wide, who appeared at night, who followed silently. One man in particular even tied it to something older, a figure from the 1960s UFO lore named Indrid Cold, also known as the Grinning Man. But we'll get to him later. The point is, the smiling man story didn't scare people because it was violent or gory. It scared people because it felt universal. Because who hasn't walked home at night and felt like they were being watched? Who hasn't glanced over their shoulder and thought they saw someone standing there, just a little too still, staring a little too long? That's why the smiling man stuck. Because the story isn't just about one guy on Reddit in 2012. It's about a fear that every single one of us has carried at some point. The fear that someone, or something, is out there, waiting, smiling, just for us. And as more reports started surfacing, it became clear. This wasn't just one story. This was a pattern. After that first Reddit post, people started chiming in with their own experiences. At first, they looked like copycats, people trying to ride the wave of a viral story. But the more you read, the harder it is to ignore how consistent they are. Different years, different countries, but the same man, always tall, always thin, always smiling. Here are just a few of them. One man said he was driving home late at night through his small town. As he pulled up to a crosswalk, he noticed someone standing at the corner. It was a tall man in a suit, thin, stiff, completely still. The driver slowed down. At first, he thought the man was just waiting to cross the street. But then, he looked at the face. The man wasn't just smiling. He was grinning ear to ear, his teeth visible, his eyes locked onto the driver's. And then, without moving his arms or legs in any normal way, the man stepped into the crosswalk. His body seemed to lurch forward, each step exaggerated, jerky, wrong. The driver slammed his foot on the gas, speeding through the intersection. When he looked in the rearview mirror, the man wasn't crossing anymore. He was standing perfectly still in the middle of the road, still smiling. Another account came from a woman who lived in an old apartment complex. One night, she heard faint footsteps in the hallway. When she peeked through the peephole in her door, she saw a man standing there. He was tall, his face tilted slightly upward, smiling wide at nothing. The woman froze. She didn't know if he was a tenant, a stranger, or something else. But then he began to walk, slowly, with deliberate, exaggerated steps, back and forth down the hallway. Every few feet, he would stop and face a door, not knocking, not trying the handle, just smiling at it, as if he was waiting for someone inside to open it. Eventually, he stopped directly in front of hers. She held her breath, terrified he could hear her through the door. He didn't knock. He didn't move. He just stood there, smiling. When she finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole again, a few minutes later, the hallway was empty. He woke in the night and saw a tall figure in the corner. The face tilted upward, the grin fixed and rigid. He was paralyzed, unable to move, and the figure never advanced. It simply waited, watching, smiling, until, without warning, his vision went black. When he woke, the corner was empty. These stories are chilling on their own, but when you line them up, patterns start to emerge. The smiling man never speaks. He doesn't run. He lingers where no one should linger, watching too long, smiling too wide. And then he's gone. And the scariest part, most of these encounters don't happen in abandoned houses or forests or far-off places. They happen in ordinary settings, streets, hallways, bedrooms, places that are supposed to be safe. That's why this story has taken hold, because it doesn't ask you to believe in demons or aliens or anything supernatural. It just asks you to believe in something we've all experienced. That moment when you feel like someone is watching you, and when you turn to check, they are. But if the smiling man really is showing up across different decades, countries, and situations, then we have to ask the question, who or what is he? Some people think it's just an urban legend that snowballed. Others think it's psychological, hallucinations, sleep paralysis, the uncanny valley. But there are others who point to a much stranger possibility. They believe the smiling man isn't new at all. They believe he's been here before, in stories that go back over half a century. And that's where the name Indrid Cold comes in. But was the smiling man just another version of Indrid Cold? Or something else entirely? To answer that, we have to look at the theories people have proposed. When stories like this start spreading, the first question people ask is it real? With the smiling man, there are three main theories. The simplest explanation is that the smiling man is just that, an internet story, a creepypasta that got popular and then snowballed as people added their own variations. And it makes sense. Once the first Reddit post went viral in 2012, it was everywhere. YouTube, Tumblr, horror blogs. People love scary stories, and the more they're repeated, the more real they start to feel. So maybe all these other encounters are just copycats. People who read the story, then months later had a creepy experience and remembered the smiling man. Their brains filled in the blanks. If that's the case, then the smiling man is no different from Slender Man, Bloody Mary, or the Boogeyman. An idea that spreads, not a figure that walks the streets. But there's a problem with this explanation. Some people claim to have seen him before the 2012 post ever existed. And their descriptions, nearly identical. The tall, thin figure, the unnatural movements, the grin. So if it's just an urban legend, why do the details line up even before the legend began? The second theory is that the smiling man isn't a person at all. He's a trick of the brain. Psychologists talk about something called the uncanny valley. It's the feeling we get when something looks almost human, but not quite. Think mannequins, dolls, animatronics, even realistic robots. They trigger this gut-level fear because our brains know they're close to human, but not perfect. The smiling man fits this perfectly. A grin that's too wide. Movements that are almost human, but just slightly off. Our brains pick up on it instantly and it makes us afraid. There's also the possibility of sleep paralysis. In those moments between waking and dreaming, people often see shadowy figures standing in their room. Some report them smiling. Some even describe them moving closer. So maybe the smiling man isn't out there at all. Maybe he's a hallucination, a mix of fear, darkness, and an overactive imagination. But again, this theory doesn't explain everything, because many of the smiling man stories happen outside, people driving, walking, or wide awake in the middle of the night. These aren't dreams. These are encounters on the street, in hallways, in the real world. So if it's not just folklore, and it's not just in our heads, then what is it? This is where things get really strange. In the 1960s, in West Virginia, people reported seeing another strange figure. He was tall, he was thin, he wore a suit, and he had an unnaturally wide grin plastered across his face. His name was Indrid Cold. He was first seen during the same time as the famous Mothman sightings. Witnesses described him as humanoid, but not quite human. His face didn't move when he smiled. He seemed fascinated with people, but didn't behave the way a person should. One man even claimed that Indrid Cold tried to communicate with him telepathically, not speaking with his mouth, but directly into his head. Now, whether or not you believe those UFO-era stories, the similarities are hard to ignore. The grin, the silence, the sense that he wasn't just a man, but something pretending to be one. So some people believe the smiling man is the same entity. Maybe he's been here for decades, showing up in different forms, under different names. Maybe he isn't tied to one place at all, but moves wherever he wants, appearing in empty streets and dark bedrooms, just long enough to be noticed. And if that's true, then he's not an urban legend. He's not in your head. He's real. The truth is, none of these theories fully explain the smiling man. If he's just a story, why do people report seeing him before the story existed? If he's just psychology, why do people see him while they're wide awake, outside in the real world? And if he's paranormal, then the question becomes much darker. What does he want? Because the smiling man never attacks. He never speaks. He never asks for anything. He just watches. And in a way, that's worse. Because when something doesn't behave the way we expect, when it breaks the rules of being human, our minds can't rationalize it. We're left with the most terrifying explanation of all, that maybe he doesn't want anything. Maybe he just wants to be there. And if that's the case, then the real horror isn't what the smiling man does. It's that there might be no way to stop him. By this point, the smiling man was no longer just a creepy internet story. He'd become something else. An archetype, a figure people claim to see in different places, under different circumstances. But the most disturbing accounts weren't about seeing him at a distance, on a street corner, or under a streetlight. They were about the moments when he closed the space between himself and the witness. Years later, in the Pacific Northwest, Another man described something similar, but far more aggressive. He was cutting through his neighborhood after a late shift when he saw a figure at the end of the block. The first thing he noticed wasn't the face. It was the rhythm. The man's steps were too long, his arms jerking outward as though his body was glitching frame by frame, each movement breaking the rhythm of real life. Every movement looked rehearsed, but rehearsed badly. The witness slowed, the figure slowed, and then, almost in sync, both stopped. For a heartbeat, the man thought it might end there, but then the smile appeared. Not gradual this time, but sudden, snapping across the face like a light switch. And then the figure lunged forward, not running, something worse. Each stride was grotesquely fast, the arms flailing wide, the legs clawing distance out of the pavement with inhuman speed. The witness finally made it to his house, slamming the door behind him, gasping for air. He looked out the window, but the street was empty. And yet, he swore he could still feel the grin on him. Another witness described something worse. She woke to find a grinning figure in her room, not in the corner, but standing halfway between the wall and her bed. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her body was locked. And then the figure tilted its head, the smile stretching wider. It didn't remain still. It advanced. One jerky step, then another, until it was standing right at the bedside, its grin hanging above her frozen face. She blacked out instantly. And when she woke, it was morning. The air still felt heavy, as if something had only just slipped away. The reason these encounters hit so hard is because the smiling man doesn't fit into any category we understand. He intrudes without purpose, a presence that simply exists, offering no explanation at all. And sometimes, that's scarier than anything else, because at least when someone is dangerous, there's a logic. You know what they want. But with the smiling man, there's no motive, no explanation, no end game. He just watches. And if you're unlucky, he follows. So who, or what, is the smiling man? If you believe the skeptics, he's nothing more than an urban legend. A story that started online and spread because it taps into something primal. Our fear of being watched, our discomfort with the uncanny. If you believe the psychologists, he's a hallucination, a byproduct of sleep paralysis, exhaustion, or the uncanny valley, a glitch in the way our brains process faces and movement. And if you believe the paranormal researchers, then the smiling man has been here all along. He's not new. He's not modern. He's the same grinning figure that haunted people in the 1960s, and maybe even long before that. But here's the thing. No matter which explanation you believe, the smiling man works because he's simple. He's not a monster from a cave or a creature with a backstory. He's just a man. A man who smiles too wide. A man who doesn't move quite right. A man who shows up when the streets are empty and no one is around to help you. And the reason that's terrifying is because it could happen to anyone. To me, to you, to anyone walking home at night who suddenly feels the weight of eyes on them and turns, only to see a grin waiting in the dark. When we archive stories like this, the temptation is always the same: to solve them, to put them into a neat little box labeled "explained" and move on. But the smiling man resists that. If he's just an internet story, why do so many people describe seeing him before the story ever spread? If he's just a hallucination, why do witnesses encounter him in the middle of the street, wide awake, with no history of sleep disorders. And if he's paranormal, if he really has been here for decades under different names, then what does that say about us and about the world we live in? Because the truth is, what terrifies us about the smiling man isn't what he does, it's what he doesn't do. He only appears, smiling wrong. He doesn't break into your home to steal or hurt. He smiles, he moves wrong, and then he's gone. That's why he lingers in our minds. Because if you can't name the threat, you can't defend yourself against it. You can lock your doors against burglars. You can carry a weapon against attackers. But how do you protect yourself from something that only wants to be there? Maybe that's the point. Maybe the smiling man is just a story, a shared cultural hallucination, a mirror of the uncanny valley, that space where something looks almost human, but not quite. Our brains reject it, and we call it a monster. Or maybe he's real. Maybe he's been seen before under different names, from Indrid Cold in the 1960s to countless grinning figures in folklore that stretch back centuries. Tricksters, demons, spirits that wear our shape, but never our intent. In the end, the smiling man forces us to confront something we'd rather ignore. That sometimes the most frightening things in life are not the ones that want to hurt us, but the ones that want nothing at all. Because a smile is supposed to mean joy, kindness, recognition. It's supposed to reassure us that we are safe in the presence of another human being. But when a smile is held too long, when it doesn't move, when it belongs to someone who doesn't act the way a person should, it becomes a mask. A mask that hides nothing, because there is nothing behind it. And that's why this story won't die. Because every single one of us has walked home late at night. Every single one of us has felt eyes on us in the dark. And every single one of us has turned, hoping to see nothing at all. So the question isn't whether you believe in the smiling man. The question is whether you'll think of him the next time you're alone, moving from one pool of streetlight to the next, hearing only your footsteps echoing against the concrete. And if you glance up and notice someone too still, smiling too wide, standing just a little too close, what will you do? Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep the candle lit.